right, welcome back, fellow jazz bums. Today we are very excited to have Nick Phillips join us. Nick, we are a huge fan of yours, so thank you for coming. We really appreciate it. Before we jump into it, remember to like and subscribe. We also have the Jazz Bums Discord. We're going to drop a link to that in the description. And we also live stream every Friday, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Felipe to get us started.
Thank you, Mike. Hi, Chris. Thank you so much, Nick, for joining us today. It's a pleasure, honor. We're really happy that you're able to make it. And welcome back, everybody watching the channel. So to start with, Nick Phillips, right? Currently, he's the president director of the California Jazz Conservatory, but he has like a huge, extensive career dating from decades, about 30 years career into the music industry. As a record producer, he worked on many records, compilations from like jazz giants such as, Tony Bennett, Ray Charles, Coltrane, Duke Ellington, Wes Montgomery, Thelonious Monk, you name it. He also produces new records. He's an educator. He's a panelist, workshop leaders in many conferences, taught in many courses, university courses. He's in many boards. He's a consultant. He's an artist coach. He curates playlists, and he's also a musician. He is a trumpet player. He's a recording artist with 2 records released in 2014 and 2016, which actually reached the Billboard charts. He also works for the Recording Academy, the Recording Academy of San Francisco, the Grammy Foundation, University of Pacific, and currently his latest gig is to be the second president of the California Jazz Conservatory as of October 2023. And to have a chat with us today, here he is, the great Nick Phillips. Thank you so much for joining us, for attending this. And we're
Thank you
honored
so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Well, again, thanks for joining us, Nick. And one of the things we always kind of start with is, how did you get into the music? Or, what was your music like in your childhood with your parents and stuff? And then how did you get into jazz and that sort of thing?
Yeah, well, there was always music playing in the household when I was growing up, but it wasn't jazz. It was actually a lot of R&B and classic rock, like Stevie Wonder's Songs in the Key of Life and Earth, Wind and Fire and that kind of stuff. So that kind of 70s soul and R&B music is certainly embedded in my architecture, if you will. But I started playing trumpet when I was in the 5th grade. When I was in the 4th grade, the local high school jazz band in Sonoma Valley came over and did a concert, and I was just blown away by the sound of the high school big band, and in particular the sound of the trumpet. So I started studying trumpet in the elementary school in the 5th grade, and then played in the junior high jazz band, 7th and 8th grade, and really started getting more into jazz. When I think it was a freshman in high school, a couple of friends of the family said to me, "Oh, you play jazz, you should check this out." One of them said, "Check out Miles Davis' Kind of Blue," which was, how can you go wrong with that recommendation? And then the other said, "Oh, you have to check out this Clifford Brown Max Roach album, Clifford Brown Max Roach." And he gave me a commercially released cassette tape, which I completely wore out over the next 4 years. I can't tell you how many times I listened to that album. So it was really early in high school that I started getting into more legit jazz, I guess, for lack of a better description. There were certainly gateway artists at the time when I was in junior high school. Chuck Mangione was really popular, had the crossover hit Feels So Good. So that was kind of a gateway artist, if you will. So yeah, that's how I got started in jazz.
I think Felipe's been listening longer than me and Mike, but we kind of really got into jazz during the pandemic.
Really? That soon?
Yeah.
Recently. Wow. Yeah,
recently. I mean, like for me, I listened to like Bitches Brew and like Headhunters back in my 20s and the 90s.
Yeah.
It's kind of all I delved into. So we're still learning, very much in the learning mode. So,
well, this is just evidence to everybody that it's never too late to start getting into jazz, right?
Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
So straight after that, did you go to university, study music? How did you end up more professionally into that? How did
Yes,
that
so I did. I knew that music had to be a part of my life and something that I wanted to pursue professionally as well. And I went to the University of the Pacific Conservatory of Music, Dave Brubeck's alma mater. And while I studied music, and my degree was a Bachelor of Music in Music Management Business. So while I was studying music at the Conservatory in jazz, I was also taking courses in business and the music business.
And to connect it to record collecting, in terms of actually like vinyl record collecting, is that something that kind of you've always done, or did you get caught up in CDs and then come back to vinyl? Like how much of like the record collecting aspect, or when did that start for you?
Well, so I was starting to collect records when I was in elementary school and junior high, and that was really the only viable format. Besides, well, there were analog cassette tapes, and I go back far enough to have heard 8-track tapes. My mom's car, but I never gave up on vinyl. And what I mean by that is, I recall early in my career at Concord Records, CDs had completely dominated the marketplace. This was the late 80s. And we had this warehouse just full of LPs that weren't selling, and LPs were just being returned. And at one point, the president of the company, Carl Jefferson, said, all right, well, the LP business isn't happening anymore. We're going to destroy our inventory and write it off. And I said, hey, wait a minute. Can I get a copy of each album in the warehouse before we destroy them all? And he said, yeah. And he said something like, yeah, it'll cost you $1.50 each. He made me some quote per. So he wasn't just giving them to me for free. And at that time, I wasn't making any money, right. but I bought about 250, 300 vinyl.
Whoa!
Oh wow!
Before they were destroyed, and then of course we all know how the story progressed. That vinyl's making a resurgence, and it's the CDs are the things that are continuing to diminish.
Yeah.
Now, have you been working at Concord and Craft ever since? I mean, for that whole time?
So I started at Concord in September of 1987, right out of college. And I worked as a full-time employee and was ultimately the vice president of Jazz and Catalog A&R. At the time that I left the company as a full-time employee, that was 2016, to form my own independent consulting and production company. And Concord's catalog division, it wasn't Craft Recordings yet, but their catalog division was my first client. So I continued to work with Concord and now Craft Recordings, which is the catalog division of Concord, for more than 35 years.
Wow.
Oh. And you've always been in the Bay Area?
Yeah, I've always stayed in the greater Bay Area. So when Concord was purchased in the early 2000s by Norman Lear and Hal Gaba, they relocated the company to Los Angeles, but they allowed me to continue to work as a full-time employee from a home office in the Bay Area. And then when Concord acquired the whole Fantasy catalog, which included such great jazz labels as Prestige and Riverside and Contemporary and Pablo and Milestone, and of course the Stax label and Fantasy, I then moved into what was the Fantasy building at 10th and Purple in Berkeley. Okay. And so I was in that office for about 9 years.
Where are the tapes like for all that Fantasy stuff? Is that are they in LA, or where's like the vault for that?
Yeah, they're in a climate controlled vault in LA. So Concord, I think pretty much to all of the masters from all the different labels across all the different genres are stored in Los Angeles, if I'm not mistaken. Or if they're not, then they're in the process of being.
So will you go in and kind of peruse the titles sometimes?
I don't actually go into the physical vault. So there's a database, and I searched, and the database also has photos of all the spines and tape boxes. And so I do research that way. I look things up in the database, digging for unissued material. There's also when the vault was in the Fantasy building in Berkeley, there was actually a vault in that building. Okay. And the vault manager at that time, Stuart Kremsky, also put together his own kind of list of everything that was in the vault. So I cross-referenced those two a lot.
You're in a position that I think the three of us are very envious of, that you're able to kind of ideate artist catalogs and propose new releases through craft. And I guess one general question is, what is, like, I'm sure it's probably case by case, but what is kind of the process for you to, for example, like the Eddie Lockjaw Davis Shirley Scott box? What was the process to kind of get that proposal together and then get kind of the green light for that? And does it differ based on each project?
Yeah, it does differ based on each project. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm looking for a compelling story, right? Because the craft vault is just loaded with amazing quality music. And so obviously that has to be a given, that the music has to be top notch before I even consider proposing a project. But then what's the story? So with Lockjaw, it was his centennial, that the thinking that if ever there's a good time to acknowledge Lockjaw, who I think is incredibly underrated saxophonist, so consistently swinging and soulful. And, if you like soulful jazz, he's your guy. And also I felt that Shirley Scott hadn't been given her proper due as well. And, she was also an important part of all these prestige cookbook albums. And I also love the cookbook theme. We had reissued the Cookbook Volume 1 as part of the Rudy Van Gelder Remastered series several years ago. And I also realized that some of these other cookbook albums had long since been out of print. So for all of those various reasons, it made sense to propose this project. And fortunately, Kraft agreed. And we've gotten a lot of great press coverage on it. NPR Fresh Air did a really great piece on it. So
yeah.
I gotta say, just real quick on that release, that's my favorite reissue of any kind for the entire year.
My take on that box, Nick, is like box sets are usually a hassle to open, pull, and this is the one box set I don't mind doing that. I really like pulling it out and listening to it because I think not the packaging and the music. I mean, it's just really, really good.
Yeah,
it topped expectations of everybody, I think.
Yeah, and our fellow YouTube friend Ken McAuliffe, I know, when I did an interview with him, he was just raving about the Lockjaw project.
Yeah.
And I see it on the background there. Mike has it. Nice product positioning there, Mike. Thank you very much.
I got the 4 titles here. It did such a great job. And I didn't have any of these titles. Usually when I would find these, like in shops, they would be pretty beat up. So I never really found like a good clean copy to bring home. And I was glad that, you basically put these out. So I was really, really happy.
Well, and we also got Bernie Grunman to cut the lacquers directly from the analog tapes. So yeah, I think this set sounds amazing.
Okay.
Where were those sleeves made? Because they are top notch.
Yeah, the sleeves.
Where were the sleeves made? I don't recall. That's a good question. My counterpart at Kraft Recordings, Mason Williams, he's the senior vice president of catalog A&R there.
Yeah,
he would know.
They are really, really nice. They're not like, they're glossy, but they're not high gloss like the other ones.
Yeah.
I feel like they're just right. They're,
Oh yeah.
they're super nice. So
Well, that's one of the many great things about doing projects for craft recordings. They really have a great attention to detail. I mean, it's quality for every step of the way. So, so when I can come with them with a vision for a project, I know that the craft team is going to really beautifully execute that vision.
Yeah.
So is that kind of your role? Is just the coming up with the ideas? I mean, is that like?
Well, it's not just the ideas. So as a producer, I'm overseeing every step of the process.
okay.
So, I like to make sure we have a story to tell and a compelling marketing hook, and then I figure out, okay, who's the right jazz writer for this project?
Yeah.
In this case, Willard Jenkins was an obvious choice, and working with sometimes they're in-house art directors and designers. Sometimes craft recordings will hire an independent, but do the back and forth of my ideas about the direction we might take on the art and their ideas, and coming to an agreement, and letting them run with their talents on the design of the package. Of course, the audio is very important to me, the audio quality, and so I'm also approving test pressings or digital master refs when they're, in most cases, if we're releasing these box sets on analog LPs, we're also releasing them in digital and high-res digital.
And the CDs, yes. Yeah.
So the quality control in terms of the sound is also part of my responsibility, and being willing to find people like you about these projects.
Yeah,
thank you.
which I'm really happy to do, because it's a really fun part of the job.
Yeah.
You talked about Ken, and I think we first saw you interview with Ken one or two times, maybe around the time that Lockjaw Box came out. But, it's interesting because we had all talked kind of, in the YouTube vinyl community about craft and how there wasn't really a face to the company, right? And it feels like you're kind of becoming that person. Like for Blue Note, they've got Joe Harley that'll come and do these sorts of things and talk about this stuff. But craft was just kind of, before you started coming along, was just kind of like this monolith where we didn't have any kind of connection to. Does that make sense?
Well, and part of it is because the craft label, they're custodians of not just the jazz catalogs, but they have multiple genres that they're dealing with. And so I'm the de facto jazz, box set guy. I come up with these ideas, and I also curate playlists for them and do other things, but I'm a general jazz consultant. But on the record production side, my role at Craft is coming up with these ideas for deluxe box sets and getting them through the system.
Do you have any?
They don't necessarily call out the producer in the press releases unless they ask me for a quote or something. But chances are, if you see a jazz box set coming out on Craft Recordings, I've probably had something to do with it.
So would that include the small batch or any of the OJC work or like that?
No, so they're handling those in house.
Okay.
So between Mason Williams and Mark Pirro, handling that series. So generally speaking, single album reissues of single albums are just being handled in-house by Craft. They have a system, and they run with that. So my involvement is more in terms of coming up with creative projects, of taking these masters and presenting them in a different way.
I mean, across the board, though, between these box sets you're doing, the new OJC stuff, and then like my favorite is Jazz Dispensary is just one of my favorite, like things there is. All the stuff they put out's really great, but the quality on all of them has just been excellent, which is nice, and priced well. So, it's not something we always get. Yeah,
Craft always tries to. Of course, they have to make a profit. I mean, it's a business; it's not a not-for-profit organization. But they're always fair about the pricing for the value that the consumer gets.
Yep, for sure.
It's a pretty fair pricing. And given the track record on those boxes, Nick, is there one that you say is your favorite or most proud of? You go back with the most.
Gosh.
Who's your favorite kid?
I have a little stack of them right here. So
Okay.
let me see. I'm proud of them for different reasons. But let me go to the mammoth one that I'm particularly proud of.
Oh
This
yeah.
Train 58 project.
Yeah.
I'm really proud of. I mean, it's multiple LPs.
Yeah.
Coltrane's 1958 output as a leader on Prestige, leader and co-leader on Prestige. And there's a beautiful booklet embedded in here.
Yeah.
With all kinds of cool photos and ephemera and some really insightful liner notes by Ashley Kahn. So that's one of my favorites of, the recent past several years, I would say. This career spanning Bill Evans collection.
Oh, that's a
Oh
good
yeah.
So this is the first career spanning cross label Bill Evans collection.
Okay.
And I'm a uber Bill Evans fan. He's
Mm-hmm.
my favorite jazz piano player. And I would say that his musical influence on me personally as a musician is every bit as much as, say, the influence of Miles Davis. I'm a trumpet player and I'm really influenced by this piano player.
Yeah. And his relationship with fantasy was interesting, right? He was not like fixed in the 70s. He was also working for other labels.
So yeah, it's interesting. And one of the reasons that we were able to pull off this cross-label collection is that now a few of the labels are under the Craft Recordings umbrella. So you have Riverside, right? I mean, some of the most influential jazz piano trio recordings with his trio with Scott LaFaro and Paul Modian. And so a collection of those are represented in here. But then also you mentioned Fantasy, his Fantasy era recordings. And then Craft Recordings and Concord had acquired some of the Warner Jazz catalog, and that included all of the Bill Evans Warner Brothers recordings. So you have those three labels that are actually in-house at Craft Recordings, and then we went to Verve to license other tracks to fill it out. So there was a period that he was at Verve. So it seemed like an ambitious project when I first conceived of it. But then when Warner Brothers came in under the Craft Recordings fold, it seemed like maybe we'll actually be able to pull this off. And fortunately, Verve also played ball, and here we are with this career-spanning collection.
How long does a project like that one or like the Lockjaw box take from your conception to being on the shelves to sell?
Always longer than you plan, so you have to really plan far ahead. But these projects take it usually at least a year, if not a few years, and for a variety of reasons. Craft Recordings can only release and market so much, and they're releasing other major projects in other genres. Also, sometimes we run into snags in the research and finding the right master sources. So it's a variety of reasons it can take a while. Like, for example, the Bertha Bop set, which is sitting there behind Chris, that took quite a long time just to get master sources.
I bet.
And in some cases it was going to the Library of Congress, finding a independent collector who had one of the old original 10-inch LPs that you just can't find anywhere. So sometimes it takes a while to cobble all that together.
So what was the rationale and conception behind the birth? Like, why did you select those titles? Was it an anniversary, or was it just something you were aware of that you think that you were?
See, it's been a minute, so I have to try to remember.
Okay.
I believe we did this in conjunction with a milestone Savoy anniversary.
Okay, makes sense.
And the concept, kind of revealed itself to me as I was researching the Savoy catalog, because these Bertha Bop LPs were actually 10-inch compilation LPs that Savoy had put together in the early 50s.
Mm-hmm.
And they also served as a perfect companion piece to the, I'm going to grab a visual aid here.
Yeah.
To the Charlie Parker.
I missed out on that. I'm regretting not getting that.
Which was released, if I recall correctly, in conjunction with Parker's centennial.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, when I discovered that Savoy already had a series of 10-inch LPs called the Bertha Bop, and I thought that would really make a cool collection, collecting all of those 10-inch LPs together in a nicely produced box set. But then the challenge was getting all the sources together to recreate those 10-inch LPs with the original artwork.
I was really impressed with how they sound too for the time period. I mean, they sound really, really nice.
Yeah, Joe Tarantino did a great job mastering, and fortunately, we were lucky that Michael Cascuna had inadvertently done a lot of research for me, because he had released a Savoy bebop collection on Mosaic a number of years ago, and he had some good sounding master sources that he had cobbled together. So that helped with a lot of it, but there was still a lot missing that I had to do some real digging to find.
Yeah, it must be really challenging mastering those, right? Because the sound quality across those recordings must be so irregular. I think to make it
it's kind of all over the place, and also because it's a compilation. It's not just remastering an album where it was all recorded at the same place at the same time with the same engineers. So you have different engineers, different locations, different levels of sound quality, and plus, you're talking about recordings in the late 40s and early 50s. So there can be all kinds of issues. So yeah, I think Joe Tarantino did an amazing job bringing this whole collection together sonically in a way that makes sense and is enjoyable.
Are there any challenges with photography and design? Does Kraft have the rights to a lot of the photography that's used, and do they do the design in-house?
So there can be a number of challenges with photography on these jazz releases, because Kraft Recordings owns very few of the photos by the jazz artists. So almost invariably, we have to license photos from the photographers or their representatives, and Kraft has to build in a budget for that as part of the art budget. Fortunately, with some of these earlier projects, like the Charlie Parker Savoy 10-inch LP collection and the Bertha Bop, the William Gottlieb photo library, which is housed by the Library of Congress, that's PD. Thanks to him, he said he wanted, in his will, he said he wanted to make these photos available to the public domain. So those have been a cool resource for projects featuring earlier recordings. But otherwise, we have to license the photos. And whether it's an in-house designer or an independent designer working on the project, it depends on a number of factors. The bandwidth of the staff, depending on how many other projects they have on their plates and whether they have the bandwidth to take on another one of mine. Sometimes, in the art meeting, they'll be talking about the different projects coming up, and someone will say, "Oh, I have to be the one to do that Bill Evans project," or "I have to be the one to do that Miles Davis project." So sometimes it's just a matter of one of the in-house designers being particularly excited about it. So it varies from project to project, depending on a number of circumstances, and also kind of the overall concept we're going for with the art and the packaging. But I've been very fortunate that the in-house design staff at Kraft Recordings is top-notch, and every designer that I've been paired with outside of the company has really stepped up and knocked it out of the park too. So I have no complaints when it comes to the art for the process.
For the cover design, say if there's like a Reed Miles design, is that something that Kraft is just able to get the design team to recreate? And are there any like copyrights or anything associated with the design itself?
Yeah. So if you're talking about, so there's a distinction between individual photos and photos that are used as part of an existing album cover design, right? So I think almost without any variation, the original album covers were copyrighted by the original releasing label, and those copyrights are now all under Kraft Recordings. So anytime we're doing a reissue and we're using the same cover, there are no issues.
Okay.
Kraft owns those rights already.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to divorce a photo from the context of the cover,
I see.
you'd
That's
have to license it.
Oh wow. Okay. Even if it's the same photo that's on the cover, as soon as you take the old fonts
Yeah,
off
so
the
the context matters, because that copyright applies only to the whole album cover, not the individual elements like the photo.
Yeah. Speaking for Chris and Felipe, one of the things besides the music that we love is the artwork and design. There's something, special about like those Reed Miles and Goldblatt covers, and they're as important to us as some of the musicians.
And I think that's one of the primary reasons that attracts people to vinyl records, right? Because there's this touching feeling. You're grabbing something, you want to see some artwork there, right? I think that's
it's a tactile experience, and also vinyl involves active participation from the listener, because you got to put it on the turntable, and drop it. Hopefully you clean it if it needs cleaning. Carefully drop the needle. 20 minutes later, you got to get up, turn it over. So you're actively involved in the process. Whereas digital, you can just put something on and it can be musical wallpaper. You don't have to be actively involved. So there is a difference.
For your own record collecting, like how large is your jazz section? And then also, do you go out digging often? Are you at record stores looking for new stuff? What's your kind of collecting strategy?
Well, I try to curb it a little bit, and I do also. I would say I'm ambidextrous in that I do listen to a lot of high-res digital music as well, for the convenience and the portability and all that. Unfortunately, I have so many records that I'm paying for a storage unit to house the ones that I don't have room for at my house. So I'm trying to tame that habit a little bit, and also, because I have access to so many great albums digitally as well. But it's an addiction. So just like I would have a hard time giving up coffee, I'd have a hard time giving up continuing to collect records, just because I do really appreciate that all the care and craftsmanship and artistry that goes into even just a vinyl LP, let alone a collection, a box set.
Let's take a step back in time a little bit too. So we kind of talked about your high school and college. How did you get into professionally playing jazz and then recording albums and stuff? Like how did that happen?
That's a good question, because obviously I studied music throughout my childhood and through college, and while I was working at Concord, I was continuing to study on the side with some notable teachers like Warren Gale on trumpet, and he was a Bay Area trumpet player that used to play with Stan Kenton, and Peck Allman, some great players in the Bay Area. I studied with Mike Vax when I was in college. But I also studied jazz piano with Mark Levine, who was the guy that wrote two amazing books that are the standard for jazz piano and jazz theory. One's called the Jazz Piano Book. One's called the Jazz Theory Book. So I studied with him for a couple of years, jazz piano, even though I'm a trumpet player, because that really helped me get an understanding of harmony, and that opened up the piano as being a tool for composition for me. How I recording my first album came about, I would play gigs in the Bay Area casually throughout my career, variety of gigs, more commercial, like top 40 band gigs and salsa gigs and some jazz gigs.
Oh, cool. Okay.
And in, I guess it was 2012 or 2013, I got asked to sub at a gig in Berkeley, and the pianist at the gig was Kava Menzies, and we just immediately had a musical connection. And so that led, she said, we have to record together.
Wow.
And I was, because I have a standard for myself that's, I'm always comparing my own playing to the greatest of all time, which isn't fair to me, but I do, Miles Davis and Chet Baker and Lee Morgan, Freddie Hubbard. And I'm like, I'm not ready to record an album. She's just, yeah, you are. And I think we should. So we did. We recorded an album. We released it in early 2014. I think an advantage was, of course, I came to it not only as the co-leader and trumpet player, but an experienced producer. I'd worked with so many other artists, helping them make the best records that they could. So I think that was really helpful. Turns out I was actually proud of how the record sound, and we released it and got a lot of great press and hit the Billboard Jazz chart. And it's not something I could afford to do full time. It's the playing the trumpet and writing music is kind of a side thing for my own therapy and mental health. I just love doing it. But that's how that first album came about. And then the second album with a vocalist and pianist named Jenny Mabey, I was kind of, I guess, a clinician at the West Coast Songwriters Conference. And Jenny played for me and a couple of other industry professionals. And I was knocked out by what she was doing. And I discovered that we live not too far away from each other. And I said, hey, we should just get together sometime, maybe write some music and do a little playing. And that led to the second album, Haiku, which was co-led with Jenny.
Did you self-produce both?
Yeah, so Kava and I and Jenny and I produced those projects, together.
Now, do you still like play gigs and stuff?
Occasionally, unfortunately, with the or fortunately, depending on your perspective, this new job at the California Jazz Conservatory, I'm only at the beginning of my second month on the job. Susan Muscarella, the founder, was stepping down from the position of president after 26 years.
Wow.
Quite a visionary in jazz education. And so, there's some huge shoes to fill here and a big learning curve. So I'm putting a lot of time and energy into that while still producing craft recordings projects on the side. So unfortunately for now, my trumpet playing is not only taking a back seat, it's basically in the trunk of the car, if you will. And I have no excuse in that it's right here in my office. My trumpet's just sitting right over there. But when I get a little further along into this job, my plan is to get up a little earlier, come in here an hour earlier, and play the trumpet for the first hour of the day before I fire up my computer or email and all of that.
Yeah.
Get back into that because I do miss it.
So Nick, now an interesting point. I just thought you work like curating the work of the greatest ever for deluxe releases. You mentioned many times Bill Evans, Lee Morgan, Freddie, Miles, the greatest. But at the same time, you're the conservatory. You are dealing with new artists, emerging talent, fostering talent. So how do you keep yourself with new music, this very brand new artist or current new artist? How do you keep up with them? And what's your favorite artist currently? How is that new music to you now compared to the greatest?
Yeah, well, jazz is ever evolving. Another job that I had, which was a part-time job that I did for a number of years, was I was the jazz music editor of digital programming at iHeartRadio. So I was curating all of their jazz playlists. And as a result of that, I was always looking for what's being released on Friday, what's new coming out. And so I got I already had a familiarity with a lot of today's jazz artists, but that really reinforced that on a weekly basis. I'm always listening to what's new, checking out what's being released. And jazz, I think, is one of those art forms that it requires both an appreciation and a knowledge of the tradition, but also innovation to keep it pushing forward.
Mm-hmm.
And to paraphrase what Kenny Werner said in his book, Effortless Mastery, the jazz tradition is innovation, right? You think of all of the great jazz artists, and what were they? They were musical innovators. From Louis Armstrong to Miles Davis to John Coltrane, etc. So, there's a historical lineage that runs through, but it's also a tradition of creativity and innovation. And it's really invigorating for me to be at an educational institution now where not only me, but everyone around me is literally living and breathing jazz 24/7, right? Yeah. So we have our degree program here. We're the only private accredited music conservatory in the U.S. solely focused on jazz.
Oh, wow.
So then we also have a community music program, which is called our Jazz School, that provides courses, workshops, and performance opportunities for students in the community of all ages, from that middle school kid that's just starting to learn to improvise on the trumpet to that septuagenarian that has a little more extra time and is retired and is getting back into pursuing their passion. And then we also have a concert series and a concert venue. Rendon Hall is a 100-seat concert venue. And we present performances not only by internationally renowned jazz recording and touring artists, but also regional jazz artists. And of course, it's a performance venue for our students. And so throughout the first half of December, we have not only performances by the students in the degree program, but performances by the youth students, performances by adult students and adult ensembles. Mm-hmm. So I forget what my point was. It's amazing. It's this is really an amazing jazz community here that we walked into, and it's really, the premier jazz educational institution on the West Coast. And I couldn't be happier to be working at the California Jazz Conservatory now at this phase of my career.
Yeah. Is it a kind of project that you see in the future, like expanding, have more than one location, for example? Or
that's a possibility, at this point, the vision is really continuing to grow the degree program, grow the Jazz School community music program, but it's a possibility. But for now, the focus is being the premier jazz educational destination on the West Coast, which is what we really are.
That is great.
That's really awesome, because we want this music to continue into this, into this new century we're in, and move forward and all that. One of the things that's funny to me is every time there is big innovation in jazz, the critics just crap on it. It seems like over all of them, but bebop happened, or when swing started, all the Dixieland critics got pissed, and then you went into bebop, and all the swing and traditional people were upset. So, do you see the music moving forward even today, or do you? I've seen some people kind of comment that, well, there's been some YouTubers that have put out videos that say all modern jazz musicians sound the same. They're just doing all the stuff that people have done before, which I don't think is really fair or true, but do you see innovation moving forward?
I do, and when I look at if you go back and you listen to music from any decade, you listen to jazz from any decade, you're going to hear really clearly how different it was from the previous decade. It does continue to evolve.
That's one of the most fun pieces of listening. You know, if you look at a single artist like Coltrane's Prestige stuff, starting with his self-titled, right, and then looking at, you know, Ascension, obviously, like, there's a huge progression and a lot of innovation and a lot of experimentation throughout that. It's not even necessarily linear. You could argue that he's trying all different types of things. I mean, comparing Africa Brass to Giant Steps to Meditations is like, you know, it's just so varied. And I think looking at it through the decades, one of the things I've noticed about some of the modern stuff that I've been purchasing is it seems like a lot of the musicians today, where like I'll listen to some old stuff and it'll be like, this is a hard bop record, or this is like a boogaloo record, or this style or that style. And maybe there's variation between tracks on an album, but generally that's how that seems like the modern musicians now just do like they'll be like this song will start, it'll sound like it's free, and then it comes back into a traditional sound, and then it goes out into something, you know, spacious. And it's like they're almost like taking all of what came before them and just throwing it all together and using it all. It's almost like for me, sometimes it's hard to define as like a subgenre because they're doing so much stuff, and almost like it's like interdisciplinary in nature, and like that's almost like the style.
Or it's like a reverence, you know, I think a rereading, kind of citing in a sense. Yeah.
Well, it takes a while for a musician to be able to sound like themselves. I mean, we all start with our influences, and make no mistake about it, being a jazz musician is a lifelong pursuit. You know, it's not like you ever arrive and say, okay, I've done it all and I'm the artist I want to be. So we're all filtering various musical influences through our own lenses while we're getting our technique and musicality together. And also consider the fact that how ubiquitous it is to be able to hear different styles of music. Whereas back in the day, you would listen to a radio station, you'd find out about new music, or you'd buy a record. The range of music that you had access to was much more limited. Mm-hmm. Now with digital streaming and you know, basically the borders between countries and musical styles being eliminated musically in that regard, there are infinite numbers of possible influences musical influences that there can be on a musician. So to your point, some people just kind of taking everything, throwing it all together. Maybe that's just part of the process. They're sorting through all these possibilities and trying to figure out as a process, as a result of that, who they are as a musician. And it's part of the journey, right? You look at, like you used Coltrane as an example, all these different phases on his musical journey. They happened rapidly though, because he was such a restless innovator. But he was searching for his voice and something even greater than himself.
You know, one of the challenges I have, and I don't know about you, Felipe and Mike, but we're not musicians, right? And I think you're the first like professional musician we've talked to on our channel. But one of the interesting things for me with jazz, one of the things I struggle with is trying to, I know if I listen to a record and I don't like the way it sounds, I like the music. But one of the hard things for me is to try to figure out, okay, why is this so innovative? Like I don't know, whatever record it is, you hear that it's like a milestone and it was like this new thing. And, that's one of the big challenges I'm trying to kind of figure out now too, is why was this specific thing different than the other stuff that came before it? Does that make sense?
You mean if it's an album that's been acclaimed as being innovative and you're trying to figure out why was it innovative?
Yeah.
That's interesting because I think about this a lot because there's a lot of music that we listen to now that's part of the jazz tradition and the history.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we always fully appreciate how innovative it was at the time.
Yep.
Because it set the standard and forged a path for so many that followed that it can sound commonplace
Mm-hmm.
To some degree. One example I use is Wes Montgomery. His whole guitar technique and his approach to the guitar was totally innovative. But because so many guitarists that came after him, not only in jazz, but
Mm-hmm.
even in smooth jazz and other genres, have been so influenced by him, and we've heard so many of those artists, then you go back to Wes and you think, okay, yeah, he's amazing. He's great. You forget how innovative he actually was.
Yeah.
That's the context.
And you have to kind of imagine transporting yourself back in time
Mm-hmm.
and thinking about what came before. What does that sound like? And then listen to Wes Montgomery. And then you start.
That's exactly the point I was making. I'll listen to a lot more like big band stuff, I think, than most jazz fans nowadays. Just I like it, but it's that's the context I'm trying to get in my brain over the years as I listen to jazz, is to really understand kind of that process that the music went through over the last 100 years now.
Yeah.
So
And
really
I did want to mention, Nick, I believe you produced the Wes Montgomery Full House recordings for Kraft. So that is it's a 3 LP. We'll drop a link to that in the description if anybody wants to check it out. And then I think another project that is just coming out is Hot House, which I believe is the Massey Hall.
I have a visual aid for that.
Oh, excellent.
Historically amazing, super important.
Yeah, so this is I don't know if you know the story behind this recording. There are a number of them.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's really cool about this particular set is one set of the liner notes are an eyewitness account of the evening. And then another, the son of Alan Sharp, who was a member of the Jazz Society that put on the concert and was also one of the photographers there. His son, David Sharp, wrote some liner notes recounting his father's stories about all the different things that happened before, during, and after the concert. But one of the things that happened was Mingus was listening to playback of the recordings immediately after the concert, and reportedly was dissatisfied with the low level that his bass had been recorded. And he took the tapes and then he went into a studio and overdubbed new bass parts so that he could be heard more clearly. And so the various 10-inch LPs that had come out are kind of a mix of recordings that feature the bass overdubs and those that don't. But when Debut Records, Mingus and Roach's label, released the original 12-inch LP Jazz at Massey Hall, that featured all tracks with bass overdubs by the quintet.
Okay.
So what this collection does is we present all of the quintet recordings without bass overdubs, all of the Bud Powell, Max Roach, Charles Mingus trio recordings, and plus the unaccompanied Max Roach drum solo. And then at the end, we close with what was the debut 12-inch LP, the Jazz at Massey Hall album with the bass overdubs.
That's great.
Yeah, it's an exciting release. Is that one available already? I don't know.
I think it is.
I believe so. Yes, it came out sometime in November, which was
okay. Cool.
Excellent. We'll link to that as well. That's great. Titles like that where you do deep dives, and then like The Birth of Bop. These are like fundamental pieces of kind of the jazz canon that I don't think a lot of people have access to or have in their collection. So getting these out, I think, does a service to a lot of record collectors, a lot of jazz record collectors. And they're cool titles. They're not the titles that everybody's doing all the time. So
I'm glad you think so.
I think it's a cool one. I've wanted that in my collection because it's always been like dubbed the greatest concert ever. Right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So I've always wanted it, and I think there are a few versions out there, but I think this is the one to get. So
Well, I've got to tell you, all the time I've spent listening to these recordings, working on it, there is such an electrifying excitement on this project. I can understand why it was called the greatest jazz concert of all time, even though it's a marketing hook. But
yeah,
when I listen to the way Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie are just spurring each other on in this recording, and that circular energy that you get from the stage to the audience back to the stage, it's thrilling. And being a jazz trumpet player, I'm still just scratching my head and face palming, trying to figure out how Dizzy Gillespie does all the things he does on the trumpet.
So when can we expect do you have a plan for when you're going to announce your next titles? I know there's stuff that's not even out yet that has been announced, but do you have like a plan to roll out things for 2024?
I'm working on projects for 2024 and 2025 already.
Okay.
And well, I don't want to get ahead of Craft Recordings publicity and marketing department, so I don't want to get too specific. But I'll just wave a few vague carrots on some sticks.
Okay.
So I am working on a Miles Davis project that's coming out next year.
Very cool.
I'm working on a Bill Evans project that should be coming out either 2024 or 25.
Okay.
A Thelonious Monk project that's coming out 2024 or 2025. Charlie Parker project that'll be coming out next year, and a number of other things. So
Wow.
I just say stay tuned, because there's a lot of great music coming from Craft Recordings in the next couple of years.
That's very exciting.
It's very cool.
That's great.
So we'll make a separate video speculating about all that.
Well, and when they are announced and they're about to be released, please have me back.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So Nick, what is your personal favorites? I mean, what's the stuff that you listen to the most at home?
It really depends on my mood, and because there's so much great music available. But so one of my favorite albums that I go back to time and time again is the Relaxin' album by Miles Davis.
Yeah.
With John Coltrane, Red Garland, Philly Joe Jones, Paul Chambers. A couple of things I love about that album, Miles is mostly playing trumpet with the harmon mute, and I just love the sound he gets with the harmon mute. I mean, he's the guy responsible for popularizing that sound in jazz in the first place. So one of the things I love is Miles, he plays with the harmon mute throughout most of the album, I think all but one track, and I just love his nuances with the harmon mute and that sound in general. And also what strikes me about this, when you listen to each of the different solos, whether it's Miles or Coltrane or Red Garland, the rhythm section plays differently behind each soloist. They really they adapt their support of the soloist to the style of the soloist. So check that album out sometime and listen with that in mind. You listen to the variation and how the rhythm section plays behind each soloist. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a big Bill Evans fan, and one of my favorite Bill Evans albums is Explorations with Scott LaFaro and Paul Modi, and I listen to that all the time still. We were talking about this Jazz at Massey. That's become a favorite all over again as a result of working on that project. And also, things like Oliver Nelson Blues and the Abstract Truth and Art Blakey Monin, those just classic, indispensable jazz records. Pat Metheny's Still Life Talking, I think that's a brilliant album. I could go on and on.
So we usually with guests, we'll have like a show and tell. Did you bring any records that you wanted to show?
So let me see. Let me do ones that I didn't already hold up earlier.
Yeah.
So let's see, I did Charlie Parker.
Yep.
Hot House,
Massey Hall.
Jazz
Okay.
at Massey Hall. This is a little recap. Bill Evans.
Okay.
Everybody still digs Bill Evans. Clear
Yeah.
Red.
I love the packaging of that and the John Coltrane. I really
This one
yeah.
came out this year,
Yep.
and it features both contemporary records albums, Way Out West and Sonny Rollins with the Contemporary Leaders,
Yeah.
and also a third LP of alternate takes from both sessions.
Yep.
And a great interview in the booklet Ashley Kahn conducted with Sonny himself, hearing Sonny tell the stories about going out to California for the first time.
Yeah.
And his musical approach, and how he was recording without piano. So the Strolin concept, for an entire album. This one came out, I forget a few years ago.
Okay.
This is the Thelonious Monk Prestige 10-inch LP collection. It was a lot of fun working on that one. And of course, being a trumpet player, I'm really loving and proud of this collection, the Miles Davis Complete Prestige 10-inch LP collection.
Wow.
I wish that would come back, would get repressed. I know that's impossible, but
well, that's the thing with these deluxe box sets. They're so expensive to produce.
Yeah.
That if you find something you want, make sure you buy them while it's available, because if you wait until aftermarket, when it's out of print and people are selling eBay or Discogs, you're going to pay a lot more for them, and it's often just cost prohibitive for craft recordings to repress a smaller run. So you got to get it in that initial batch.
Well, some of these boxes too, I mean, like the Sonny Rollins, a Lockjaw box, they'll go on sale 6 months after they come out when they're still in stock for a really great price. And we tell everybody whenever we see that, we're like, dude, go buy this right now.
If you want it, you better get it now.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Oh yeah.
I love the whole 10-inch box concept too, by the way. I've only got the Bertha Bop one, but it's very hard for me to sit and listen to an LP box set all in one sitting. It's just so much music. Where like Bertha Bop, I'll listen to the whole thing.
It's easy, right?
An hour and a half, 2 hours, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
It's really those 10-inch box sets are really a cool experience.
I'm glad you like them. I like them too. They're fun. It's cool because you have it's kind of like a time capsule. You're going back in history with the 10-inch LP formats.
I love the 10-inch. Yeah, I have a cube of 10 inches, and I do have one of those Charlie Parker Savoys. It has like a blank back, and it doesn't sound. I mean, I'm not using a mono cart, but it doesn't sound that great. And I really regret not getting that Savoy box that you put out with all 4 of those titles.
Yeah, the sound quality is greatly improved when you compare.
And I read the reviews
our recreations of those 10-inch LPs versus if you're able to find an original pressing.
It was early in my collecting. I read the reviews on it, which were stellar. I think it was on like Absolute Sound, or it was like, I think Bremer may have reviewed it, and everything was great. And then this was my own naivety, is that I saw that like it wasn't AAA, and I was like, oh well, then I can't get it or whatever. And now I realize how foolish that was. That if anything, it probably made those records sound even better than.
Well, and here's the thing especially with older recordings where you have issues on the analog tape.
Yeah.
The degradation due to the hands of time, and so a lot of these old analog tapes have a lot of dropouts. They have a lot of sonic anomalies, and you can't do anything about that if you're just taking the tape and cutting from the tape to the lacquer.
Yeah.
But if you take the tape, transfer it into high res, I mean, we're talking really high res digital, then a mastering engineer like Paul Blakemore, who worked on the Parker set, can go in. He has the tools in the digital domain that you don't have in the analog domain to try to repair dropouts and fix some of the sonic anomalies. And so, yeah, I believe, as you do, that the sound quality on this Charlie Parker 10-inch LP surpasses the original all analog releases.
Yeah. I think the end product is the most important part. Usually the analog road is likely the best one, but not always. And I think the restoration in those old tapes is fundamental.
You know, if you have a situation where your analog tape is in excellent shape and you don't have dropouts or other ticks and other weird sonic artifacts, then yeah, it's nice to be able to go directly from the analog tape to the lacquer, like we did with the Lockjaw set, and like we did with the Sonny Rollins set. But that being said, if you didn't know whether the source was analog or high-res digital, would you really be able to tell the difference? Some people say they can, but
there was a big ordeal about that last summer
I remember.
Where a lot of people figured out they couldn't really tell, you know.
One of my favorite Riverside records is Sam Jones's Soul Society. It has a blue cover, and I have a mono and a stereo of it. It's pretty difficult to get, and it sounds like it's not really well recorded. The music is fantastic, but I've noticed with Riverside sometimes the recordings, I don't think that they were done, the best. They weren't like a Van Gelder studio thing. It was, I don't know what they used, but that would be something, if it were ever reissued, I would want it to be, converted to digital. And if people can, do better instrument separation or pull out things a little better like that, that is like the use case for it. That record probably can sound a lot better than what's on the tape originally. So that's just what I've always thought about that one. I do love that record.
Yeah. And Riverside, there's so many great recordings on Riverside, and it does depend on the album in terms of sonic quality of the original recording, because they used, unlike Prestige, which after a certain point they were just using Rudy Van Gelder, so you had that consistency of Prestige records. Riverside, they had different recording situations, different studios. I think at one time they had negotiated an arrangement with a studio that was basically being used for commercials, and they would come in at night and record there, So, it depends on the album. I've heard some Riverside albums that sound amazing, though, too.
Yes.
Depends on the album and who the engineer was and what the studio was.
I just purchased a mono copy of Bobby Timmons, this year's Bobby Timmons, with the.
That's a great album.
And I'm curious to hear how it sounds, like, because Riverside it's inconsistent, so we'll see how it sounds. But I love that record. I'm so happy to have found a copy for a good price.
Yeah, that's a great album.
Yeah. So. All right. I know that we've been at it here now for over an hour. Thank you, Nick, for joining us. This was really fun. You're definitely welcome back whenever you want to, come and promote anything or just say hi. Chris, Felipe, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, just again, thanks for the work that you're doing. All these things are just fantastic and some of our favorite reissues. And then, like Mike said, you're always welcome back. And if you're ever just bored on a Friday night, come join our live stream. It's crazy. It'll be fun.
Oh yeah,
we'll definitely kick off all the other idiots to bring you up for sure if you ever want to do that.
Well, thank you all. It's been a lot of fun, and it's great to talk about this music with people who really are passionate and care about it. So.
Cool. No, it was really delightful. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was really, really terrific, and hope to see you again in the future. Sure, talk about the new box sets coming out. Yeah, right. It's very exciting. I do appreciate you're very kind during the whole process.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
All right, bye.
Thanks, everybody.